And I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We commend Pakistan for its fruitful work as chairman and for its able leadership of the committee. We thank Ms. Melissa Shlemenko for her informative statement. We would also like to thank the Secretary General of the United Nations for his report on the work of the Department of Global Communications. We note the efforts of the TGC to fully report on the activities of the World Organization in the field of information. If the chairman... Once again, they were forced to begin their statements before the Committee on Information with Tom's question. The United States continues to systematically abuse its position as host country to the United Nations headquarters. The participation of representatives of the Russian delegation in the 46th session of the committee was once again interrupted by the non-issuance of visas, despite the timely submission of documents. This is another serious breach of the obligations of the central organs of the United Nations under the agreement. This clearly demonstrates the true relationship of the US authorities to the protection of freedom of access to information and media pluralism. We hope that the United Nations Secretariat and the leadership of the relevant structures of the organization will make the necessary efforts to fundamentally manage this unacceptable situation based on legally binding agreements with the host country. Mr. Chairman, we are deeply disturbed by the continuing deterioration of the situation in the area of freedom of expression and equal access to information. First, the collective Western countries are among their like-minded countries, where political censorship is practically imposed. This is evidenced by the years of bullying of Julian Assange, who has been persecuted for his beliefs and journalistic work. Such trends will have the most tragic consequences for Western countries, which continue to portray themselves as mentors of the rest of the world on the ideals of freedom of speech and pluralism of opinion. As a result, the world today is facing the rapid fragmentation of the global information space. It creates an almost impenetrable information bubble. A one-sided, distorted and false picture of the world is being imposed on a society that finds itself in it and lacks access to alternative sources of information. The undisputed leader in imposing severe restrictions on the media and journalists is the Zelensky regime. They are willing to commit the most sophisticated crimes to eradicate any criticism and dissent. In Ukraine, all opposition media have been banned from accessing thousands of internet resources. Russophobia has long been an integral part of the Kiev regime's modern media policy. National and regional television channels openly promote hatred of all Russians. This is in a country where a large proportion of the population continues to speak Russian. He did not use all the power of the repressive apparatus to persecute the special services against those who disagreed with the Kiev regime. Kidnapping of civic activists and journalists has become a daily norm. Public figures. Most of the victims were tortured or ill-treated. Some of them were taken in unknown directions, and their fate is unknown. However, there are confirmed facts of physical massacres against unpopular citizens. At the same time, with the support of SBU, the extremist website Peacemaker continues to operate, and we have repeatedly attracted the attention of the international community. The site publishes personal data of disloyal authorities, politicians, journalists, civic activists, suspected anti-Ukraine activists, Russian citizens, and even children. In total, more than 240,000 people have been included in its database, of which about 75,000 are Russians. There are also foreign citizens outside, including the United States. The extreme manifestation of intolerance of other views is the targeted and brutal murder of Russian journalists by terrorist means. Only recently did Daria Dugina die at the hands of their agents in the Ukrainian Secret Service. Vladlen Tatarsky, Oleg Klokov, Rostislav Zhuravlev, Boris Maksudov, Semyon Eremin. Writer and public figure Zakhar Prilepin miraculously survived the terrorist attack. At the same time, Kiev officials openly, bravely participated in these crimes. The brutally planned murder of journalists confirms the ugly nature of Zelensky's neo-Nazi regime, which has launched a real hunt for Russian media representatives who enjoy all the rights of civilians. Its Western curators deliberately turned a blind eye to all of Kiev's crimes. The culmination of cynicism was Washington's self-evident silence after the death of journalist Gonzalo Lira in an SBU dungeon in January. Since the SBU arrested the inconvenient journalist, his US and Chilean citizenship countries have chosen to ignore him and provide him with real support. In fact, they denied him. The tragedy of Gonzalo Lira, who allowed himself to have his own opinions, once again highlighted the face of the collective West. Ryan advocated freedom of press speech in his words, but in fact protected it only when it was in his interest. Of particular concern is the dire situation of media freedom in the Baltic republics, which have persecuted representatives of Russian-speaking media under the pretext of combating Russian propaganda. They are under severe pressure, and all pro-Russian internet resources, radio and television channels are blocked. If they disagree with this policy, they will be imprisoned, and all possible intimidation methods will be used against them. Latvia, for example, began to consistently ban all Russian television channels. At the same time, the ban failed to affect the popularity of the Russian media. Latvian residents continue to watch them bypass the obstacles they have repaired. In the same country, Russophobia has reached an astonishing scale. Therefore, in September 2023, the Latvian parliament approved a new concept of national security, according to which Latvian public media will be banned from holding meetings in Russian from January 1, 2026. This is happening in a country where Russian is the main means of communication for at least 40% of the population. Moldova is also following the path of the Baltic states' Russophobia. The Maia Sandu government deliberately decided to provide Russian-speaking residents with alternative sources of information in the last country by shutting down the broadcasting and retransmission of Russian television channels and media. Hundreds of journalists from these news outlets lost their jobs at the behest of politicians. The company itself was accompanied by biased and unsubstantiated accusations of hate language, inciting Russophobia in Moldovan society. Cases of persecution, pressure, and intimidation of journalists and pro-Russian activists have been documented. This is just one of many examples. On September 13, 2023, the Moldovan authorities decided to expel Vitaly Denisov, the leader of the Russian-speaking news portal Moldova Sputnik. And officials of the Moldovan Immigration Service broke into the journalist's apartment and detained him, accusing him of interfering in the country's internal affairs. The reporter was escorted to the airport for immediate deportation without being allowed to collect his personal belongings. In this regard, we would like to reiterate the lack of response of relevant international organizations to incidents that do not conform to pro-Western narratives, breaches of international obligations, outright crimes, and even terrorist attacks against media and journalists, whether in Ukraine, Western countries, the Baltic states, or Moldova. It shows the bias of their current leadership. It is not his inability to perform his professional duties faithfully and impartially. The silence on freedom of expression has allowed the authorities of these countries to further suppress unpopular media and journalists, effectively turning human rights institutions into their accomplices. The chairman is concerned about the sharp deterioration of the protection of journalists' rights in the escalating Israeli-Palestinian conflict, where, contrary to the requirements of UN Security Council Resolutions 27 and 28, they slowly cease fire and violate the norms of international humanitarian law in the enclave. The Israeli armed forces continue to cause unprecedented casualties in military operations. Journalists killed around the world in 2023-03-15 is the current Palestinian-Israeli escalation. Journalists in southern Lebanon have also been killed. The West's smear campaign against UNRWA in Jerusalem is a sad example of misinformation. Wine pipeline aimed at eliminating our activities in the occupied Palestinian territory. Despite external pressure, the Palestinian Authority has been effectively assisting Palestine refugees in the Middle East under extremely difficult conditions for more than 70 years. So far, more than 180 UNRWA staff members have been killed in the Gaza Strip, an absolute counter-record for the United Nations. We believe that urgent measures must be taken to rectify this situation around the pillar. The chairman's website deserves special attention for the challenges associated with global digital transformation. Taking advantage of the fact that Western countries are the main ones, control ever internet from the jurisdiction of these countries, mainly the United States. All these major monopolies are registered. Washington authorized the logical completion of the process, which was designed to be global. Digital dictatorship means that the state completely loses the ability to extrapolate its sovereignty over the digital field. The prerequisites for full control of the digital space are being created with the ability to disable any information alternatives. Western certification, mainstream, for example, on the scene. Recently, xenophobic Russian nationalists have continued to spread actively in Western monopoly ITIA and Russiophobic material. Thereon, the moderators don't pay attention. At the same time, they are ruthless. Channels and media accounts of ordinary users. They broadcast something different from the West. Views. Behind the submarine, behind such arbitrariness, repairable. Administration, big. Corporate IT is usually owned by US government agencies. The facts of such interference are often made public. Therefore, the current internet configuration of intermediaries have become a tool for manipulating public opinion and spreading aggressive propaganda. The problem is compounded by what is currently missing. International legal norms allow, appropriately, to combat this behavior of the IT giants. A special category. Risks come from the ubiquitous spread of artificial intelligence technology. Today's phenomenon is deepfakes and content generated using neural networks, and they are indistinguishable from produced a human. Some of the systematic anti-counterfeiting measures have long been in place, and it is necessary to establish a universal verification mechanism. Information? We believe that any decision in this regard must be made. Receive countries on the basis of equal dialogue in the spirit of consensus. To be chairman, the Russian Federation fully supports this. Establish a transparent mechanism to deal with disinformation based on the UN. Positive example. Such work can be successful. The Vera Faith Initiative has been implemented, directed to combat fake news in the context of the pandemic, COVID-19. However, the Secretary General's proposed new initiative is global. The United Nations on Information Integrity has raised many questions for member states. We note in particular, the character is opaque. Work on the document. That's even, there is never a middle option, submitted by the results of 3 rounds of consultations. If the Secretariat plans to issue the initiative, member states will follow suit. Necessary, in-depth, a truly broad consultation. Otherwise, it will be inconsistent. A stillborn product. I would like to thank Mr. Chairman for his comments. The United Nations Information Center in Moscow is committed to multilingual work and efforts. In terms of distribution among the general public, information about activities of the World Organization. I'm talking for attention.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation.